Welcome to the Southern Steward Podcast, where we explore stewardship through the lens of our faith and the great outdoors.
You're listening to episode 1 of the Southern Steward Podcast. We're getting started here. My name is Will Blount, and co-host here is Kyle White. Kyle, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what made you want to start doing the podcast?
Yeah, Kyle White. I was raised here in Satsuma and own a forestry and land management company here in Satsuma where we do timber sales and land management practices such as prescribed fire or herbicide applications, reforestation, that kind of thing. On top of that, I'm an avid outdoorsman, I would say. Really love bow hunting for whitetails, and more specifically, traditional bow hunting with whitetails. I picked up a longbow a couple years ago and have been pretty solid with it, and I really enjoyed that. But also have 2 kids, a 7 and 5-year-old, and we enjoy camping as a family and a little bit of hiking and exploring, and we try to stay out in the woods doing as much as we can outdoors, as much as possible anyway. Well, as much as 2 kids under 7 will let you get away with anyhow. So, we like being outside, and that is kind of what I've built my life around, is being outside from my profession to all my hobbies, and that's what I want to do.
I'm Will Blount. I'm actually an engineer at a power plant, but I've been hunting and fishing all my life. As far as, stewardship and kind of what made me want to do this, from a young age, I was always taught to respect the outdoors, whether it's hunting or fishing, whatever it is. Just kind of respect it. Growing up, I couldn't kill anything unless I was going to eat it. It's kind of the, what my dad always kind of instilled in me. So I couldn't just go out there and shoot a squirrel and throw it off in the branch. That was a no-no. If I shot it, I was going to clean it. So, there were times where I would clean 1 squirrel or 2 doves or something, not really worth your time cleaning, but just for the fact of we're not just going to, shoot stuff and kill stuff just for the fun of it. But
side note, I shot a dove in my backyard when I was 8 one time with a BB gun, and it was on a Sunday morning before church, and I was in my church clothes, and my dad and my parents, they didn't see it. But I started crying after I shot it, and I ran out there and grabbed it and buried it before they found out. But it ruined my day. And right. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I never forgot about that dove. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess it did some good for the soul or something.
Well, not for my soul.
Right.
It may have for the SOIL, but right. Not for my SOUL.
But yeah, I've also been tournament fishing, bass fishing for, I guess it's been about 12 years. That I've been tournament fishing. I'm fairly serious, not as serious as others, but I like my fishing for sure.
You're pretty serious about it.
I'm serious more serious than most people, I guess.
You're the most serious person I know about it.
There's more serious people out there, believe it or not.
I can see that. Will's got a pretty sweet bass boat, and he travels pretty regular to fish tournaments. He's been pretty coy about it, I guess. But Will's won a couple tournaments here lately, even.
I had some good luck this year fishing the Fishers of Men Trail.
Yep.
Which is a great trail. It's a Christian trail as well, and Bass Cat's actually the main sponsor of them, which is one of the reasons I went with a Bass Cat when I bought one. It was which they're fantastic boats. I love it, I really do, but. Just that they've supported more than just Fishers of Men. They support a lot of Christian organizations and somebody you feel good about supporting.
All right, so we wanted to start this podcast and to talk about this stewardship stuff, but we're going to have various guests throughout the podcast, and we'll talk to several different people and kind of do an interview style podcast, mainly talking about topics that will pertain to conservation or the outdoors, hunting, fishing, or land stuff, or whatever. We don't really know exactly what all we're going to get into yet, but that's kind of the idea. And tonight we're going to have Chris Blount on. He's a big-time crappie fisherman out of Washington County. I had the privilege of going with Chris a couple weeks ago, and me and Will fished with him, and we caught a whole bunch of fish for our fish fry we do here at the church, and it was a blast. And at least me anyway, Will's a better fisher than I am, but me anyway, I'd have never caught fish if it wasn't for Chris, so I'm pretty pumped to talk to him about it. And I'm going to throw it over. Chris is Will's brother, if you couldn't tell by the last name, so I'll let Will introduce him.
Yeah, so we'll have Chris on tonight. Like I said, Chris grew up doing the same thing I did because, of course, we grew up in the same household. So we went fishing and hunting all the time. When I grew up fishing, it was not a certain species we were targeting. It was we're going to take various different lures and live bait out here and see what's biting, and we're going to catch that and then take it home and eat it. So, it wasn't like, let's go bass fishing today or let's go crappie fishing today. It was, let's go fishing today. So Chris grew up in the same environment, and he gravitated more toward the crappie where I gravitated more towards the bass. And he's stuck with it ever since. He's a school teacher, so summertime, like right now, is his bread and butter because he gets to go all the time. He takes advantage of his summers off for sure. But, yeah, we'll get talking to him and get some details on kind of things he does and looks for and what the fishing's been looking like lately. Chris, you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into crappie fishing?
Well, I'm Chris Blount. I'm originally from Leroy, Alabama, but I live in Jackson now. But I've been crappie fishing about 25 years. Me and my dad, we used to pretty much bass fish all the time until probably about the late 90s. And we had a place at Miller's Ferry that we built in 95, and first few years there, we pretty much were just bass fishermen. We really didn't think a whole lot about crappie. And then after that, I actually had a guy, Brian Pansing, show us how he was catching crappie drop shotting. And so we kind of started drop shotting for crappie and at Miller's Ferry, and that's what kind of got us going up there. And then around that same time, we started crappie fishing here on the Tom Bigby at home, and that's been the late 90s, and pretty much been crappie fishing ever since.
All right, yeah, and I kind of spoke a little bit about kind of how we got started together and how we started fishing, and it was more of a, we went fishing for what was biting rather than a specific species. But so how's the fishing been this summer? I kind of mentioned earlier that you were a school teacher and have the summers off. So how's the summer been so far?
Yeah, like I say, summer is whenever I do majority of my fishing, just because I'm off. And so Tom Bigby's been pretty good this year. Alabama River has been kind of tough. I mean, 2021, we were catching ton of fish on the Alabama River. I mean, it was like everywhere you went, you were catching fish, and ever since then, I mean, it's like those fish just have lockjaw. I mean, you gotta work to catch a mess of fish up there now. And but the Tom Bigby is, it's kind of Mr. Consistent. It's usually always some fish on there, not quite as big as what you're going to catch on the Alabama River, at least down on our end, but it's always a lot of fish, and you can pretty much consistently catch a good mess of fish on the Tom Bigby. And so last few trips, I mean, it's kind of slowed down a little bit here lately, mainly because we haven't been getting any rain. What happens on this lower end where we're at, because we don't have a lock or anything between here and the Mobile Bay. Once it gets this low and it hasn't been raining, then the tide starts really affecting us up here, and it's got a little more effect down on lower end of the delta, when that tide starts coming in and there's not really any water going out, then it makes the fishing pretty tough. And here, I think last week, whenever I went, right now it's been high tide during the daytime, so that water has actually been moving back up river because of the high tide, and of course low tide's been going out at night. And so whenever you get, the river essentially turns into a lake at that point. And so it's been pretty tough fishing here, or I say pretty tough fishing, tougher fishing than what we're used to. I mean, I think we've caught 40, and 51 our last 3 trips, but
it doesn't
before that we were catching 2-man limits every time. But usually whenever you get some rain, and have some current moving, those fish, they're going to be on those bigger laydowns, usually on the trunk of that log, or that tree. And so, like I said, with live scope, it makes it where you can fish a lot more efficiently. But they're going to usually be on the the deeper side of the river, the deeper banks, which is usually the clay banks. You got some of the mud banks that can have some depth on them and hold some fish, but they're going to be on those deeper banks, on those bigger tops, and usually just on the main part of the log, because they're kind of sitting there, just kind of hanging out where they're not sitting in that current. But then the way it's been lately, we really haven't had any current, and so therefore them fish are just free to roam. So I've pulled up in a lot of places, and where the fish normally sit on the main part of the log, they're not there. And I look, and there'll be a group of 12 or 15 fish just hanging out together out in the limbs. And so, you pull out there and you catch 1 or 2, well then they start moving on you, because there's no current or anything that, kind of holds them into that treetop. It's kind of like you just have a lake. So they're free to roam around. And so it's like you'll catch 1 or 2 out of there, and all of a sudden the school's gone. They've taken off just toward the middle of the river or down the bank to another top. And so it almost turns into a chase a little bit sometimes, trying to chase some of these big schools whenever there's no current like it is right now. But maybe some of this rain we've been getting, and I know we got some more rain coming next week, maybe, that'll kind of help get a little bit of water moving. And, when you don't have any water moving, it's just like at Miller's Ferry, it makes the fishing tough when there's no water moving out on that river. And so, water moving always improves the fish bite as well. So, it's tough right now, but there's still some fish that's, they're still biting in those groups of fish, but like I said, it is tough without live scope right now, because those fish are moving a lot.
So how do they, when the river starts coming up like that, is it just a bad time to go, or is the bite about the same, or is it better when it's falling?
Personally, if you look at the river readings, I know a lot of guys that, fish regularly over here, they look at that river reading. I like it when the river's between 4 and 6, because there's enough current moving to where those fish are going to group up in those eddies.
And that's the reading of Leroy, right?
Right now it's been reading. It's not above 2. It's about 1 point something right now.
Right, and that's 4 or 6 at the river reading at Leroy.
Yes, that's the river reading at Leroy. Coffeyville is going to be a couple feet higher on their reading. That's the one that's right below the locking dam. But yes, I look at the one at Leroy, and when it's between 4 and 6, I mean, I'm going, because those fish are going to be, they're going to be grouped up in those eddies, and it doesn't take long to catch a 2-man limit. Whenever the river's at that level. But of course, whenever it drops out, there's more eddies along the banks, and so a lot of those fish will kind of scatter a little bit more.
I know the Tom Bigby's kind of almost impossible to crappie fish in the winter and spring, just because the water level's so high. But especially up that way toward the Coffeyville locking dam. But What about the fall? Is it changing any as far as how you're fishing it, or is you fishing that the same way?
During the fall is actually a little similar to how they are now, just because usually during the fall you don't have much rain, so you're not going to have as much current. But one good thing I do like about the fall is they do tend to group up a little bit more than what they are now, and they usually feed a little better than what they are, right now during the summer. And so a lot of times during the fall, people want to think, hey, that water is, it's heating up, so those fish, they're going to be on down there deep. Well, not necessarily. It all depends on where that thermocline is, because, while yes, it may be cooler down deeper, but there's also less oxygen down deeper. And so, a lot of people think during the fall you got to fish deeper because that water's hotter. Well, they actually shallow up. Most time during the summer, those fish, at least on our part of the Tom Bigby, they're going to sit 7 to 8 feet. I was actually catching some a little bit deeper the other day, on down to about 9. But during the fall, those fish will group up and they will actually shallow up. They'll be sitting 5, 6 foot deep once the fall gets here. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, summertime, everybody, starts thinking, oh, the water's heating up, you got to fish deeper. And then in the fall, hey, you got to start fishing deeper. But no, they actually shallow up until you get about that first cold front that comes through. And once that, water flips over and that thermocline changes, then they'll go deep after that. But they'll actually start shallowing up about September.
Hey, Chris, before you get going any further, I want to just mention our redneck word of the week here, because you said it twice. Thermocline.
Right.
Thermocline.
Thermocline. Yeah.
Give me a rundown of thermocline.
Oh, well, thermocline is basically, and you can actually see the thermocline. If you flip to your down imaging, you can actually see where that thermocline is at. But basically, that thermocline is kind of where those fish feel the most comfortable. I mean, that's where the oxygen is at. You get down below that thermocline, and the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water, starts dropping. And so,
is this like,
they like to sit right up, right on or right above that thermocline.
Is that like where runoff meets the? I mean, is it cooler water over hotter water, or vice versa, or whatever? I mean, what is the definition of thermocline, I guess?
As far as scientific definition, I'd have to look it up. But yeah, I mean, it's those fish are going to get wherever there's the most oxygen.
Okay.
And so it's just a certain depth in the water where that oxygen is, the most dissolved oxygen is at, and so that's where they're going to sit. Obviously the deeper it is, it's going to be cooler. Yes, but
well, and I think I think the thermocline is the point in the water where the temperature change is the most drastic.
Okay.
Right. That's right.
And you see the thermoclines, you see them a lot better if it's like water that's not really moving a lot. So in the fall, you got a lot of thermoclines because the water's not moving as much. I know on Lake Martin, down toward the dam, it gets one down there, and depending on, I'm not sure exactly, I'm not a marine biologist here, but depending on that thermocline down there, sometimes you have some fish kills because that dissolves oxygen, because it'll flip where you got, cold water on bottom, hot water on top. Mm-hmm. That lake flips in the fall, and
that's interesting. Some
of that dissolved oxygen, bad water basically comes up and has some fish kills. But
that sounds like red tide kind of deal down in the bay. I mean, that's what they say. The red tide is some lack of oxygen or something along that lines. But anyway, back to your.
And you will get some fish kills, sometimes. I know here just about a week or so ago, I saw up at Lay Lake, they had a big fish kill because of the amount of dissolved oxygen. It dropped down so low.
Huh. Yeah.
So
Well, and
On
right now,
some of those lakes like that, you can get that.
especially in dry conditions. I think they have like a bubbler behind the dam that helps a little bit, but they can only pump out what's coming in, and so if it's a drought, there's not much coming in, so they can't pump a whole lot of water out, and that DO drops pretty drastically. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Miller's Ferry and kind of how you approach Miller's Ferry?
Miller's Ferry, like I said, it's a lot different animal than Tom Bigby. I know, I've had a lot of people through the years that told me, oh, well, there's just not any crappie on the Tom Bigby River over here. And, and I would have just went and, caught two-man limits of 60, the last 4 or 5 trips in a row. And I'm just kind of thinking, okay, well, I'll let you think that, but, the Tom Bigby's pretty easy to fish because, it's just treetops. Those fish, there's certain areas, certain banks that they like. And as long as there's, some type of structure in that area, you're going to find fish in that area. And so, you get to Miller's Ferry, it is a lot different because you've got main river, you've got lakes, you've got grass, you've got ledges, you've got treetops. And so it's, you got a lot of these shallow flats, especially on the lower end of the lake. And so, it's a lot different animal up there. Kind of how I approach Miller's Ferry, as far as springtime goes, that's probably the time of the year that I do the least fishing just because I coach high school baseball, and this past year I coached my son's travel ball team. And so I didn't even hardly fish this spring. But pretty much springtime fishing. And another reason, I know springtime you can go and, you can catch bigger fish, but there's also so many other people on the water during that time of year just because the weather's nice and it's spring and everybody's fishing. And so, that time of year, you just kind of got to beat the banks. If you're one that goes and puts out stake beds and that sort of thing, you probably have some areas that probably hold some good fish. Springtime, it's just a lot of shallow water fishing, just beating the banks and finding some of those shallow fish, especially, there's a lot of places up there too when that water, gets up, because the lower end of the lake, even though you have that high muddy water in the spring, it really doesn't rise or fall. It'll just get muddy. But on the upper end of the lake, and in, the further you go up, the water will rise some, above normal level. And so I know in a lot of those larger creeks and all up there, you can get in the back of those creeks and some of those places that, other times a year, it's only a couple feet deep and, you won't really find many fish there. Well, now that water is a little deeper, and, there's places where people have, thrown, a lot of Christmas trees and that sort of structure that, those crappie like to get up in that time of year and spawn. And so, they'll catch some good fish doing that. But pretty much once the springtime's over, those fish, they'll spawn in waves. You'll have some that'll be spawning in March and a lot of them in April. But once you hit May, that's kind of whenever those fish start going into post-spawn, and they'll start moving out into, you'll still find a lot of your white crappie in the creek around brush piles and that sort of thing. Your black crappie tend to make their way out toward the river. Your white crappie, they tend to like to stay out of the current in some of the big creeks and stuff up there. Your black crappie, they like it out there on the main river and a lot of that current. So they don't usually venture too far away from that main river. Those white crappie, they'll come out there. They'll come out there some, mainly whenever it gets on into June. Once it gets on into the month of June, that's whenever, you'll be catch white and black crappie out on the main river, and you usually catch a lot of fish on the main river during that time, and that's that's where I like to fish, is on the main river, just because that's kind of where I always fished up there. I never really fished much off the main river, so I love the month of June. This past year we had the big crappie tournament up there, and I think my son Levi, he ended up winning the youth division, and I ended up coming in second in the adult division up there, and that was right at the end of May. But we'd actually gotten some rain, and the water was real muddy, and I mean it was just tough. I mean we were basically just having to search stumps, just that we actually caught our bigger fish just off of stumps, not on the main river, but on some of the flats just off the main river. I just see, hey, there's one good fish, looks like a good fish there sitting on that stump, and just cast and catch them. And since live scope, I've gotten to where I cast jigs a lot up there. It seems like, especially the last few years, like I mentioned earlier, the fish have gotten so finicky up there to where it's tough fishing, trying to catch fish on a minnow. Now, this time of year right now, summertime, is a good time to use a minnow, because they will, around this time of year when that water heats up, they're a little more sluggish, so they're not really wanting to, they're not biting just real great. And so a lot of times you just have to fish that minnow there, and just, eventually they'll hit that. It may take them a minute, but eventually they'll hit that minnow. But that jig is, like I said, that water heats up, and those fish get real sluggish, and so they don't really want to come after that jig a whole lot this time of year. But yeah, I mean, we were in that tournament, we were casting jigs. I mean, you couldn't hardly catch a fish on a minnow during that time, and it's kind of gotten that way up there to where it's almost like if you're not casting jigs, it's gonna be tough to catch the fish a lot of times of the year up there. But right now it's getting on into July. Like I said, that water's heating up. Those fish are kind of getting sluggish. Once you get past about July 4th, then fish will start kind of moving off the river some, and you get on into August. And in the fall, and like I said, those fish will actually start shallowing back up some. You'll catch some fish in the fall where you actually caught them in the springtime. They'll actually shallow up. And I know a lot of people think, well, that shallow water is hot. Well, later in the day it will be, but early in the morning, that shallower water actually cools on off a lot faster than some of that deeper water does. And so those fish will shallow up in September and October, and then once it gets into November, it starts kind of getting into my favorite time of year, because those fish will start feeding up on those shad and getting fat, and they'll actually be on structure until that water temperature drops below 60 degrees. And once that water temperature drops below 60, which usually doesn't happen until about the month of December, but usually once it does, then those fish will actually get out on certain banks, and they'll start roaming in groups. And whenever it gets to be that time of year, that's my favorite time, because I can, I've got a few certain banks that I like to hit, and, I'll be in 40 foot of water, and, you'll see a group of 5 or 6 crappie, and usually they're big crappie too, usually 1.5 pounds or bigger. And they'll just be, schooling around, usually around 12 foot deep out in some of that deeper water. Usually around, if you can catch it, where you haven't got any cold fronts coming through, you may get some early cold fronts that may kind of mess that up. But as long as you can catch it where, you haven't had, a whole lot of rain hit yet, then you can, where there's not a whole lot of current moving, and you'll be able to catch a lot of those fish roaming. And, I just love being able to cast to those roaming fish and catch those big roaming black crappie. In the month of December until about the 1st of January. And then once you start getting some of those big rains come through, it kind of, that fishing like that is kind of over at that point. But, it's a lot of fun whenever you can. But that's kind of my approach to Miller's Ferry. I used to drop shot a lot in a lot of these tops and stuff. But, now that I've started with live scope and I've started fishing with jigs and casting jigs, that's about all I do now. Now I'll fish, if I went up there tomorrow, I'd probably fish with that drop shot and all some, just because, like I said, you know, the fish are getting kind of sluggish with this water heating up, so it's going to be more of a minnow bite than a jig bite. But yeah, I pretty much just cast jigs up there for the most part.
So while you're on that topic, tell us a little bit about your setup for your poles and your drop shots. Kind of, what kind of equipment are you using for each one?
I mean, I use one of three different things. I mean, I do have some 12-foot ACC crappie sticks. I actually got a 13-foot one as well that I use. That, I mean, I just fish just kind of old school, fish with a cork and a minnow. I don't fish with it as much on Miller's Ferry. I mean, I'll have it with me. There's a few places where I do use it, but I don't fish with it that much up there. Here on the Tom Bigby, I do use it a lot more because, you know, you're fishing up in treetops and that sort of thing. I mean, you can't really cast jigs, you know, in a lot of places you're catching crappie on the Tom Bigby. And so I tend to use it more on the Tom Bigby than I do on the Alabama River. Drop shot's another one. I used it a good bit on the Tom Bigby, and I used it some on the Alabama River just with a drop shot. I just tie a 1 ounce bank weight on the very end, come up about 1.5 feet, and tie off about a 6-inch leader. I use just a number 2 Aberdeen wire hook. And the good thing about the drop shot is on the Tom Bigby, you can fish it in places where, you know, if there's a little bit of water moving through there and you can't really fish a minnow under a cork because, you know, it's just washing you and getting hung. You know, you can drop that drop shot down and, you know, that weight's going to hold you there and keep you from getting hung up. And, you know, Miller's Ferry, you know, I've caught crappie as deep as 35 feet deep before. So, you know, obviously you're not going to fish with a cork that deep, and even casting a jig, trying to, you know, wait on your jig to get down that deep is, you know, kind of tough to do. But, you know, that drop shot, you know, you can catch them, you know, as deep as they want to go. And so, you know, it has applications, you know, up at Miller's Ferry and here on the Tom Bigby. And then the other thing, really, since I've gotten live scope, and I got a good buddy that from Thomasville named Travis Hudson that fishes a lot up there. And kind of whenever I started casting jigs, you know, I kind of just started doing it on my own, you know, trying to figure it out. And Shane Jones is another good fisherman, fishes up there, and I talked to Shane Jones a little bit, and, you know, learned a couple things from him, and went fishing with Travis Hudson one day, and he kind of showed me a couple of things as well that kind of helped me. And so now that's pretty much all I do. And I've got 6'6" ACC crappie sticks, spinning rods, and I like the Fluger President spinning reels, and I usually use most of the time 16th ounce weedless jig heads, especially on the Tom Bigby. Fishing in Miller's Ferry, like in November and December, don't necessarily use weedless because those fish are out in open water and you don't really have to have it. But in a lot of these brush piles and treetops, that weedless jig is a lifesaver. Otherwise, you're breaking off and retying multiple times a day, which can be a headache. And so, you know, I like the Bobby Garland jig bodies, just like the ones you can get from Walmart. Usually, like on the Tom Bigby, I like the electric chicken color. It works really well in kind of this semi-muddy water.
Is that like
you know, Miller's Ferry, if it's ever, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Electric chicken, is that like the pink and green? I know there's like a Gulp electric chicken. I think it's pink and green, a saltwater bait. Is that the same?
Yes, that is right. I guess I should have specified that. Just electric chicken could be just about anything. But yes, it's got a it's pink on top, and it's got like a green belly with gold flake. And they actually have one that I actually like a little better than it. They make one, it's called a Moglow. It's actually more of a yellow on the belly. I kind of like it a little better than the green. But I'll use them whenever that water is, like at Miller's Ferry, is, you know, not really muddy. I guess you call it more of a stain. There's another color called Mayfly. It almost looks like a monkey milk on the top, and it's like a gray with a red glitter on the bottom. That color works well. And then whenever the water clears up, I believe it's called, it may bluegrass. I may be wrong on that, but it's like a blue on the top and kind of that green belly, kind of like what's on the electric chicken on the bottom. And so I tend to like that color when that water clears up there, like in the fall, in November, December. That water will get pretty clear, and that color tends to work really well for me up there. And so, as far as my live scope setup goes, like I say, I'm a school teacher, so I ain't got the big money for the some of these guys have got they'll have 15-inch monitors, or some of them have even went as far as to now you can get these monitors that hook through an HDMI cable, so you can get like a 10-inch unit and hook it to like a 21-inch monitor. And it still be touchscreen and all. You got some guys that's doing that now with these huge monitors. So I don't really have that. I mean, I can see fish fine on the one that I've got. I've got started out with a 9-inch, and that's what I fished with for probably about a year and a half, was just that 9-inch Garmin Echo map. And after that, I ended up upgrading to the 106 just because it was a better picture. And so now I actually got one of the Millennium rod holders, and I just modified it myself to make a mount, because a lot of these mounts you see now are $350, $400. I mean, I bought this one for $100 and spent about $15 at the hardware, just getting a couple other things I needed to make it. And so I actually have both my 10-inch and my 9-inch mounted on that Millennium rod holder, and I'm able to adjust it up and down if I want to, and so it works really well. But yeah, with that like I said, with that live scope, I mean, it's definitely a game changer. I mean, it's almost like it was made for crappie fishing, because it makes it to where you can fish so much more efficiently. I mean, honestly now I've told my dad this and a couple other guys, this live scope will kind of spoil you, because you're used to pulling up to a spot and it's like, okay, well, I don't see any fish there, and moving on. Whereas if you don't have it, you may spend 15 minutes fishing there, and not know if there's any fish there or not. So that's the biggest thing that live scope has done for me, is it makes it where you can fish so much more efficiently and not waste time fishing places where there's not any fish.
It's unbelievable. My first experience with it was when I fished with y'all the other day, and I mean, me and Will pulling up to a top, and Will can turn his trolling motor to look at it, and he said, and Will made the comment at one point, there ain't any big ones here, we'll just move on. We're leaving fish because Will can see there's no keepers on that tree. That's mind blowing to me. I can't imagine how long you would have to fish to catch the amount of fish we caught the other day if you didn't have live scope.
Well, and as much as you've mentioned live scope tonight, you've put us firmly in the crosshairs of the band forward-facing sonar people. So hopefully nobody that listens to this is one of the band forward-facing sonar people. They'll want to ban this podcast after this. But maybe it's just bass fishing. Maybe they're okay with crappie fishing forward-facing. But, yeah, it's definitely a game changer. It's changed the whole landscape of fishing in general.
Oh, yeah, it has. And, one thing that forward-facing sonar has done is, I've learned a lot about crappie just from using it. I mean, up at Miller's Ferry, there's one large creek called Mill Creek up there that we fished in there from the time that, we first built our camp up there in the mid-90s. And the first day I got live scope and went in Mill Creek, I bet I found 6 places that had a pile of crappie sitting on them up in Mill Creek that I had no clue where it was even there. And so, it's almost like, I know a lot of your old timers, they hate live scope. And the reason why is because, they've got a lot of wisdom because they spend a lot of time on the water, and they know some of these places because they spent a lot of time on the water and found them. Well, live scope's one of them things. One day of live scope can make up for 10 years of searching fishing,
Well, and it's not as easy as people that don't have it or don't know how to use it, they think it's as easy as there's a fish and you just drop down and catch him. And
Right.
it's not that simple. It takes a lot of time to know where you're looking. I mean, once you get on out there a little way, especially bass fishing, I mean, you get out there at 70, 80 feet, well, you got kind of a cone out there. I mean, to know exactly where to cast and present that bait while the fish is moving, because that's one thing you learn too is the fish are hardly ever still. They're always moving. So to be able to throw 80 feet out there and let the bait sink down to a fish that is moving, I mean, it's a moving target. It's just some of the pros that you watch do it are just, it's unbelievable how good they are at it. And that takes time on the water too, but it's certainly changed the game. Just kind of knowing how fish behave and catching some fish that normally you might not catch.
Yeah, I can't imagine like Chris being, he's been talking about fishing for 3 decades, crappie fishing for 3 decades. I can't imagine what the change in your quality of fishing since the live scope deal. Just from the little bit that I've seen, it's unreal. I think it's a cool thing.
Yeah,
I'm all about it.
You can't just take it out of the box and put it on your boat and go catch fish.
Right.
Like, if you were to
still gotta know how to fish.
If you were to get one and put it on your boat and go out there, you might catch a couple you might, not normally catch, but like to be able to use it proficiently and really make it a, important part of your arsenal takes hours and hours and hours of time on the water. So it's not just as simple as throwing it on there and hooking it up and going fishing.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes time. I mean, one thing that does help is, if you know somebody that's used it a lot and you can kind of get their settings, because you do have to kind of tweak your settings.
Yep.
As far as what you use it for and all, and so.
And every body of water is different too, as far as settings.
That's right.
You got to make some tweaks on different bodies of water, whether there's a lot of sediment in the water or not, clear water. Tom Bigby River and Lake Martin have a lot of different settings. So you got to kind of learn what works and what doesn't work with that as well.
Yeah, the thing that I found that affects it the most is actually in the springtime and the pollen.
Yep.
Pollen on the water. I mean, that it's got a gain. Your gain setting is probably the one setting that you have to kind of adjust the most.
Yep.
Once you get your other settings set, you're not going to change them a whole lot, but that gain setting is what you change the most. And, you got, whenever the pollen's bad in the springtime, you got to bump that gain way on down because it's so much you wouldn't believe how much pollen is in the water.
And I think I run mine around 72% gain. What do you run yours on?
It honestly varies. I think last time I was out, I probably had it around 72. I mean, sometimes I'll bump it up there 76. Sometimes I have to bump it down to about 68. But it's going to be somewhere in that range.
Right.
Usually in the low, average, around 72. It's almost like the temperature in your house, you could say.
Yeah.
It's usually going to be somewhere in that range.
I didn't think about that. That's a good point. But yeah, that range for bass fishing too seems to be the hot range, somewhere in there. But yeah, we appreciate you coming on and sharing all your secrets with us and
a wealth of knowledge. But I want to say there's two things to me that I find interesting about Chris Blount. One, my man fishes so dang much, he's got a minnow room at his house. He don't have to go to the bait store. The bait guy delivers straight to Chris, and that's noteworthy to me. There's a man that is down to business. And number two, for you to love fishing so much, you are deathly allergic to fish, right?
I am. Those two things you just mentioned. I mean, the first thing you're talking about with the minnow guy. I mean, I do. I do have the minnow guy pretty much on speed dial. Me and him during the summer, we talk, about every week.
That's when you know you're fishing. That's when you know you're fishing.
Right. But yeah, I mean, up here where we're at in Jackson, I mean, there's two places that have minnows, and I guess both of them think that the minnows are made out of gold for what it costs. I mean, I think one place 100 minnows is $40, and another place 100 minnows is somewhere around $33, $34. I mean, you go anywhere else, you're going to pay half that price. And so, I can't afford to pay that much every time I go, fishing just for bait. And so, like this time of year, like I said, I would fish with a jig. A lot of times this summer I've just fished with straight jigs, even though I've had some minnows, and my dad, fishes with me, and he'd be fishing minnows. But like right now, I mean, they're hitting the minnows here on the Tom Beebe better than they are a jig, and so you gotta fish with what they're biting. But yeah, here on my shed, I was fortunate enough to have a kind of enclosed room with a air conditioner, so I've got a filter and all that, and I try to keep some minnows on hand, just because one of the bait shops doesn't open till 9 in the morning. Well, you wait till then, it's about too hot to go, as hot as it is right now, and so yeah, it's definitely helpful to get your minnows at a lot cheaper price, and be able to keep them right here at your house, where you can just put them in your Ingles cooler and go, and so but yeah, I figured out one day whenever I was about 9 years old. I think I'd eaten fish before then, but I ate some fish one time and just had an allergic reaction, and then one time later I just ate some chicken fingers that had been fried in the same grease as fish, and had it again. And so I've actually had allergic reaction to stuff that had been fried with fish since then. And so
that's terrible.
So yeah, I can't tell you how many thousands of crappie, and I've never eaten a single one of them.
Well,
and so, but
I'm here to tell you they was good.
Yeah, we had them the other night.
Well, I've got I've got some people around here that they like to eat them, and I usually take them some fish, and I've got a couple of older men in my church and all that used to like to go crappie fishing and all, and they're just really physically just not able to do it anymore, but they still like to eat them, and I'll take them some fish every now and then and that sort of thing. So I've always got people that want them, and so I don't have much trouble getting rid of them. That's for sure.
Well, and that kind of plays into what we'll talk about tonight with stewardship. I think taking what the Lord's given you as far as talents go, and using it as something for Him and to glorify Him. So that's a good little segue into what we'll talk about next when Kyle gets into stewardship. But yeah,
I was gonna say, and that, that's one of the reasons that I do it too, is I just like to help people out, and I know it'll it's something that'll kind of make their day. Because like I said, I know a lot of people that love to eat them. They just maybe they just don't have a boat, not able to really go fishing, and so something that God's kind of giving me the ability to do, and it's something that I enjoy doing, and I can also kind of help others out along the way. So
all right, well, we appreciate you coming on, and I know it's getting late, so I'll let you get in there to all those youngins. They're probably doing something bad.
Well,
they probably need some discipline or something by now, but
they probably do. Maybe I talked long enough to where their mom has already got them in the bed and they're asleep, and I might actually go kick my feet up in peace
maybe
for a little while. But
I wouldn't bet on it.
We'll see. I wouldn't either.
All right, Chris. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, yeah, I appreciate y'all having me on. I really enjoyed it.
No problem. We might have to give you on again.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good night.
See you, bud.
All right. Y'all too.
Bye.
All right. So on each podcast, we want to make sure that we give some kind of word or some kind of devotional time here. It'll be something that God has laid on Will or mine's heart to say, and we'll just do a quick devotion. Maybe it'll be encouragement to you, or maybe it'll be something that you need to hear as well. So tonight's devotion will be on stewardship, and I think that was appropriate for our first episode, being the Southern Steward podcast, to talk about this concept of stewardship. Stewardship, by definition, is the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. That's straight from Webster's. And stewardship is a word that gets tossed around quite a bit. even by unbelievers, right? It's a concept that we are, as people, as a society, we have this responsibility to take care of the environment, and you'll see it a lot in worldly stuff is this stewardship. But and I think it's funny that even unbelievers can acknowledge that nature doesn't belong to them. It's a weird concept if you think about it. How they think that they're responsible for taking care of nature for somebody else or whatever. That's what the stewardship means. So, but you hear it all the time. So, as Christians, where does this responsibility, this stewardship responsibility, come from, and what does it entail? We learn that from the book of Genesis, right from the beginning in chapter 1, Genesis 1, verse 26 through 28. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So from the very beginning of creation, God gave man this responsibility of stewardship. He charged us with ruling over the earth. He says, subdue the earth. And he gave us dominion over all the animals and all the creatures on the sea. So we get this responsibility of managing populations and earth and all this. It's all biblical. It all comes back from the very beginning, the responsibility we have. But we have to do so. We have to manage them in such a way that shows respect, reverence, and ultimately glory to God through it. And that's something I think as outdoorsmen, we don't really think about a lot. How what we're doing is supposed to show reverence and respect and glory to God. That's certainly something that I have to think about and be diligent about. To continue talking about stewardship, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, God puts man to work in the garden. He says he's put there to work it and to keep it. This outlines the responsibility we have to nature and to our environment, from responsibly managing natural resources to just not throwing trash out the window. When we look at nature, we're looking at God's greatest miracle, and he's given us the responsibility of taking care of it. So outside of nature and wildlife, God has given us so much more to manage for him. Our time, our money, our talents, and interests, they all come from God, and he expects us to steward them in such a way that they glorify him. The best example he gives us in Scripture about this is the parable of the talents. We find that in Matthew chapter 25, and I'll paraphrase it for us because it's quite a bit of Scripture. So Jesus tells this parable of a master who's about to go away on a journey, and he calls some servants to him, and he leaves with them talents, which is just money. And he leaves to the first one, he leaves 5, and to another one, he leaves 2, and then to another guy, he only leaves 1. And it says it's according to their ability. So the first guy with 5 talents, he goes and he trades and he multiplies his money. So he doubles it. So now he's got 10 talents. The other guy that got 2 of them, he does the same thing. He goes and he trades or whatever, and he doubles his money as well. And the last guy that only got 1, he goes and digs a hole and buries his as if he's protecting it or hiding it from people, and doesn't do anything else with it. He sticks it there. In his mind, he's thinking it'll be just like it was when my master gave it to me, and he'll be happy because of that. So master comes back, and the first guy that had 5 talents, he comes forward and he says, "Look, master, I have doubled your money." And the master says to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little, so I'll put you over much." And then he says, "Enter into your master's joy." And then the next guy that only had 2, same story. He comes forward, and master's pleased with him. He says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little, and I'll put you over much." So third guy comes up, and no doubt in my mind, I'm thinking this guy has heard, "well done," and seen what these guys did. So he had to be feeling a little sheepish at the time, but he nonetheless presents what he did. He says, "Look, I took this, I hid it away, nobody touched it, I protected it for you, and it's just like it was when you gave it to me. And his master gets angry. He says, you slothful servant, calls him lazy, basically tells him he was a waste of time. And, he says, I'll take everything that you have and give it to these other two and send you out. And he sends him out to a place of like gnashing of teeth or whatever. So what are we doing with God, what God's given us? Will we get to hear, well done, good, faithful servant, or will we be called lazy and slothful? It's not a matter of our salvation, of course. We should note that our salvation is based only on the work of Christ, and nothing we can do will change that. We can't gain it anymore by ourselves. It's only by what Christ did on the cross. Rather, this parable refers to the judgment seat that believers will meet Christ at in heaven when we get there, and we'll lay our life out before Christ, and we'll have to give an account of what we did with everything that he gave us, right? So he'll say, Kyle, what did you do with all these abilities that I gave you, all this money, all this time? Kyle, I gave you this love for hunting, and you took it and were selfish with it, and you only made it about you, and you only did the things that you wanted to do with it and chased like self-gratification through it instead of, whatever it is that Christ had planned for that interest in me, because it came from him. So we just have to keep our motives in check. We have to keep things in check and remember that everything about us, everything we own, all of our talents, all of our interests, all of our passions in life, they're given to us. God gives us those things for a reason, and it's not for us. So I typed this when I was typing up my notes here, and I was pretty proud of myself for saying it. I just say that, I patted my back. It says, do we get so consumed with hunting that our kids know more about deer than they do Jesus? I can see myself there. I can see myself caring about my kids growing up and wanting them to care about the things that I care about. And I drag my kids through the woods, and I'm pointing out deer tracks and all this. And yeah, my kids are at church every Sunday, and I think I do a pretty good job with them. But as far as, spiritual leading goes, but, we got to make sure our priorities are right. We got to make sure we're in the right there. And then the other one was, do we love to fish so much that it replaces church on Sunday mornings? Now, I don't love to fish that much. I don't suffer with that. But maybe going and sitting in a tree stand, on a good cold January morning on a Sunday morning, I'd be lying if I said, man, I probably could just sneak a hunt in before church and still make it or something,
Right.
So we got to temper those. We got to temper those things and make sure all of our priorities line up the way they're supposed to. And we have to remember that God doesn't want us not to have fun necessarily. I think he instills in us these interests and passions and stuff, but it's not just for us. However it looks, I'm not real sure yet how it looks on why God made me love bow hunting so much. I don't know yet, but I'm trying to figure out. And I think maybe that's what I'm doing, sitting on front of this microphone right now. I'm not sure, but anyway, so I hope that at least made halfway sense, and I hope somebody got something out of it. That's what God's put on my heart for this podcast, and just over the last really about a year, I've been rolling that around in my head. So,
yeah, one of my Sunday school teachers growing up when I was actually college age, it was college and career class. He grew up down here actually, and actually attended Bayou Sarah for a little while when he was a teenager. Roy Pike.
Is that yeah, I know Roy Pike. Megan Pike's dad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Roy was my Sunday school teacher for college and career, and part of his testimony was, a lot of times on Sundays he'd be at the deer hunting camp, every Sunday.
Yep.
And then he kind of, he was convicted of that, and so he kind of cut it out of his life for a while because, he's like, well, I'm letting that come over, before God, so I'm cutting it out of my life. And then he said, one day he realized, like, God place that love for that in his heart, and he doesn't want to take it away from you. He just wants to be God over it.
Right.
So
Yep.
it doesn't mean you can't go hunting or can't
Yep.
go fishing. He just wants to be God over that activity. So,
Yeah, that's good.
there's no reason that you can't do any of those things as long as you're placing God over him or over that, whatever it is. And, on Sunday morning, you're not forsaking the gathering of the saints. You're somewhere, worshiping, showing God who's important, more important in your life, or what's more important. And so, that story of his always kind of stuck with me, with my fishing, because at times I feel like my fishing has probably, got to that point. There was a couple of years in particular that it did. And honestly, those are two of the worst years of fishing I ever had.
Imagine that.
Yep. It was it's just like no decision I made worked out, and and not saying that you get saved and all of a sudden you catch fish everywhere you go. It's not like that, but
that only happened
when you're doing
once in history, right?
Yeah,
when they threw the net on the side of the boat. Yeah.
But no, it's like when you're doing it for yourself, the lows are really low. And fishing's a very humbling, like tournament fishing's a very humbling sport, and it makes you want to sell your stuff and go to the house, and
I think that's anything. I think you can get so consumed with it that you just, when it's all that drives you,
right.
I know I've been there, in hunting and several other things. People do it with work. Even it doesn't have to be something fun.
Right.
Plenty of people get caught up in their job and career and stuff. And it's the same thing. And a believer knows when they've crossed that line.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we want to accept it or not is a different thing. But we all know when we've crossed the line, and I'm sure that's what Mr. Pike was trying to convey to you.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't check it up, you'll get burned on it eventually.
Yeah.
If you don't check it up, God will check it up for you eventually.
Right.
So, anyway.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle, for the devotional. And having Chris on was great, and hopefully learned a lot from that. And some of you guys that love to crappie fish can go put that to use and catch a lot of crappie and hopefully get something good to eat. That's probably my favorite eating fish. So. But that'll do it for us here on episode 1 of Southern Steward Podcast, and we'll be putting out episode 2 here next month sometime. So you guys look out for episode 2, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening.